Hello, welcome back to You Are My Boro, our second episode of the week and a big one ahead of the final day of the season. This is it for Boro and Coventry. Boro need to win. Coventry might need to win, depending on what happens elsewhere. We'll get to that. We've got Scott Wilson with us as ever, who was at Rockcliffe to speak on Michael Carrick yesterday. So we'll get the feel of what Carrick had to say in his pre-match press conference. And we've got Andy Turner from Coventry Live as well, who's going to give us some insight from the Coventry end and hopefully maybe not give us something to cling to from a Boro perspective. We'll find out. We'll start with you, Andy. I mean, first things first. What's the feel? What's the feel down there? What's the feel around Coventry and around the club ahead of this game?
Well, I think from a fan's perspective, I think obviously there's a lot of nerves, but almost sort of quietly confident. And that's no disrespect to Boro, but they've had a decent record against Boro in recent years, recent seasons. And as they have with Sunderland, who are obviously another North East club that there's a big rivalry with, for different reasons. And I think that there's sort of a bit of a quiet confidence about it being a home game. I think it'd be different if it was at the Riverside, but it's another sellout, and the atmosphere at Coventry at the CBS Arena is really taken off, in recent seasons. And there's going to be 31,000 fans there tomorrow, and it's going to be, the sun's going to be beating down. It's going to be a lovely atmosphere, fantastic atmosphere, and that's really going to that's really driven the players on in this season under Frank Lampard. And they've got a terrific home record under Frank. And so I think, they'll be quietly confident. That first and foremost, they put in a really good performance and get themselves over the line, and it's very much sort of weighted in Coventry's favour in a way, because even if they draw, if results go elsewhere, they can still get through. Whereas with Boro, it's all or nothing, isn't it? They've got to come out and they've got to get the 3 points. And it was interesting because we asked Frank Lampard today in his pre-match press conference, if he thought that would affect the way that Boro approached the game. Not suggesting that Boro would go gung ho, but there comes a point in the game, doesn't there, if it's 0-0, that they've got to. The onus is on Boro really to force the issue really. So tactically, I think it'd be really interesting, and really interesting that two. Young managers, bright young managers, are going head to head, because obviously they know each other well from their West Ham days, England days. I think they played 53 times, something like that, together for West Ham and England combined. So they know each other very, very well. And Frank speaks very, very highly of Michael and the job that he's doing there. So yeah, it'll be a really interesting day.
We'll get to that, because Michael Carrick spoke a lot about that yesterday, didn't he, Scott? And you wrote about that's going online on Saturday morning and in the paper on Saturday as well. Just one more on Coventry. From the outside looking in, like 4 or 5 weeks ago, they thumped Sunderland, I think, before the March international break. And at that point, they looked nailed on for a playoff place. I think at that point, you probably wouldn't have had them needing a result on the final day. Have they faltered recently? And even if they have, the home form's still been pretty impeccable, hasn't it?
It has. And where they struggled, and it's really interesting, is that they struggled at teams down the bottom who are fighting for their lives. So they were second best at Derby, where they lost. That would have been a huge result if they got a victory there. Then they lost at Plymouth. Again, awful performance. And then they lost last week at Luton, where they should have got a point really. Difficult circumstances, down to 10 men after 13 minutes, and played with 10 men for 55 minutes of that game before a Luton player was sent off. So away from home, they haven't been great, to be honest. And that's sort of slightly worrying going in, assuming they did win tomorrow and went into the playoff semi-finals. That would be a slight worry, I think, is the away leg, because that has been a bit of an Achilles heel, really. But home form, they've been terrific. But I think I was saying to you before we went on air that, even when Coventry had this fantastic run of, winning 10 games out of 11 or 12 from sort of December onwards, they weren't playing that brilliantly. You know, they were sort of scraping results here and there, last minute goals, that sort of thing. And it wasn't that scintillating football. It wasn't that convincing. And then all of a sudden they played Sunderland and absolutely wiped the floor with them. I mean, honestly, it was just the best performance of the season so far. And everybody thought, wow, that's it. That's the blueprint now. But they've struggled to replicate that since.
Scott, Andy said quiet confidence at Coventry. What was the feel at Rockcliffe on Thursday, and what was the takeaway from?
Yeah, I don't think you can say that it's quiet confidence oozing through Boro, is it? Listen, Carrick was exactly like you kind of thought he would be. Basically saying, look, this is a one. You know, it's a one-off game. It's all on one game. I think in some respects, you know, I think the clarity potentially might help Boro a little bit. I mean, you know, Andy's talking there about Coventry and obviously, you know, if Coventry win the game, that's their job done. It's fine. But there are various scenarios where if the game's level, other results are going, does that affect Coventry? Does it blah, blah? Simple for Boro. If they don't win the game, everything else is utterly immaterial. And that was basically the one message that I think Carrick was wanting to get across, that, look, you know, there's a lot of talk around what might happen, this scenario, that scenario. Ultimately, Middlesbrough go in there and have to win a football game. And if they don't, everything else goes out the window. So, you know, and then it was put to him about Coventry's good record, about the fact that they clearly have improved a lot under Lampard. And I think Carrick's view was just, look, you know, we know what Coventry are. We also probably hold our hands up and accept that we haven't really been good enough in the last month and a half. But it's a one-off game of football, and we would back ourselves to win a one-off game against anyone in the division. And there have been moments this season where Boro have shown themselves capable of doing that. But, you know, as we've said on a number of these vids, it feels like that's been too few and far between, really. But partly through the kind of deficiencies of those around them, they are going down to Coventry with a chance. And I guess that's what Carrick was wanting to cling to yesterday, really.
Team news. Fans will have seen now Brad Vandenberg trained this week. Neto Borges has got a full week under his belt after returning to the bench, and Riley McGree has trained as well. But what was your feel for who might start out of those players?
I don't think McGree starts. I think he's been out for far too long. And I don't think Borges starts because I think Illing Jr. has been doing so well at left back and he's obviously out. I think the two decisions Carrick has to make are, does Rab Vandenberg come in at centre-half? Probably. If he does, who drops out? Probably Fry, because I don't think he's going to leave Houghton out, given how well he's done since he came back in the last month. And then obviously, does he stick with the Iheanacho thing that just has not been working? Or does Iheanacho come back out of the side? And you would imagine probably Bergs or go in. But we all know from watching Michael Carrick that he's not going to rip up his formation. He's not going to rip up his template. He's not going to rip up what he does. It's going to be 4-2-3-1, isn't it? That, you know, and that was kind of put to him. You know, there's obviously been a criticism. Is he too formulaic? Is he too predictable? Does he not make enough changes? And he was kind of saying, look, you know, in many ways, it's a kind of cup final scenario. There might be points at this game where we do have to do something different. And, you know, we're chasing a game or we're hanging on or whatever. And I am willing to change things and do that. But we haven't seen a lot of that. So that's going to be interesting if it comes to that. I mean, I don't know what Andy feels about kind of Lampard tactically and everything, but Carrick is very rigidly kind of stuck to what he does. And if Boro are chasing the game in the last 15, 20 minutes, it's going to be fascinating to see how he reacts to that, because that is definitely a criticism that's been levelled at him this season, that when games have, you know, started to go away from Boro or situations have changed, he hasn't been able to change with them.
The good news for Boro, Andy, is Mark Robbins isn't in the home dugout, because a rotten record against Robbins' Coventry. What's Lampard changed? What's he done well since he's come in?
What he's done well is it's his man management. He's a really bright lad, and he's just got this incredible connection. It was almost instantaneous with the players, and you can go through the whole team, the whole squad, where he's just got that extra 10, 15, 20% out of them, you know, whereas they were sort of in the doldrums before. at the start of the season. And you could just see whether it's because of who he is, because he's had such a glittering career and I think, on the first day when he came in, I think a lot of the players were a little bit starstruck. They're sort of standing there. And with the photographs, the club had took photographs of Frank addressing the players in the gym on his first day when he first met them. And, you could just see in their faces, the players' faces, thinking, wow, that's Frank Lampard, and he's really, the likes of Jack Redoney. Jack Redoney grew up as a Chelsea fan, and Frank Lampard was one of his idols as a kid. Right. Used to go and watch him at Stamford Bridge, and he's just not, and he's like the model pupil for Frank, because Frank sees a little bit of him in Jack Redoney, and he doesn't like to pigeonhole midfielders. He likes them to be dynamic. So he wants them to get forward, to get goals, he wants them to drop deep, to break up the play. He wants them to do a bit of everything. And it's really interesting. And the players they've just really got on board. And you can see in some of the images, some of the still photographs after games and some of the video and some, just watching after the games when the final whistle's gone, when they've won, the way he goes up to players, and he's a real hugger, and he sort of, he hugs players, and you can see that they're just are really bonding, with each other, and there's a great team spirit, and he's really sort of fostered that. And it was funny actually today, because a funny story came out at the press conferences. I said to Frank, have you done anything different today? Being such a big game, have you done anything different this week in the preparation? Any sort of bonding exercises, been bowling or something like that, and he said, "Oh no," he says, "the players are really good." He says they really take care of that themselves, and what they're big into at the minute is they play cricket. And we said, "Oh yeah, what on the grass?" He said, "No, in the dressing room." So they play like a form of French cricket in the dressing room, and it's just they're just sort of having such a laugh, they really are, and so that's the way they're sort of trying to sort of relax and take the heat out of the pressure, I suppose, heat up the pressure of tomorrow's big game.
It's interesting, that, isn't it, Dom? Because it's hard not to listen to that and draw parallels to Carrick coming in at Boro and that first season. Because I don't think there's any doubt that when he first came in as the replacement for Chris Wilder, just by being Michael Carrick and, like you say, having that aura and everything that went around it, he instantly changed the mood that season. Players bought into it. Yes, they hit lucky with loans that season. We all know Cameron Archer, Ryan Giles, all that kind of stuff. The Chuba Akpom move. But I think just by coming in and being Carrick and everything that goes with that, he definitely changed things in that first season. The interesting thing for Carrick, and I guess for Lampard, and maybe you've seen this at various points already in Lampard's managerial career, is that probably lasts so long, doesn't it? It takes you so far. Then the novelty of just being Michael Carrick or Frank Lampard or wherever wears off, and ultimately it boils down to, well, okay, what have you got? What have you got tactically? What are the coaches like around you? How can you deal with this? And all of that side of it. But I think that type of manager will always have a pretty, immediate impact just through who they are.
Does to both? Does the fact they know each other so well, does that have any bearing on the game tomorrow and how they might set up? Will one of them maybe try and second guess the other one? Could there be any curveballs? What are your thoughts there?
I don't personally think that Frank will veer too much away from. He's very much, more recently because of injuries more than anything else, but he's very much 4-2-3-1. So they'll be matching Boro up by the sounds of it. He has done 4-3-3, but he prefers a back four. He did change when he first came into a 3 with wing backs, but that was only because they were shipping goals, and he needed to sort of address that situation pretty quickly and get some sort of stability to results, really. But no, so I don't know. It's interesting because he came up against Wayne Rooney earlier in the season, just before poor old Wayne got the sack at Plymouth, and they were huge mates, or are huge mates from their sort of England days and stuff like that. And it was really interesting to see, that they really are good mates. And I'm sure I think he's quite good friends with Michael as well. I don't know whether they've kept in touch over the years, but they certainly played enough times in the same team to want to catch up tomorrow and and have a nice little chat beforehand and probably share a glass of wine or whatever afterwards. But no, it'd be really interesting. I think that's the side that both managers will enjoy, both head coaches, will enjoy. They'll enjoy pitting their wits against each other and trying to second guess each other. And but I don't think there'll be any surprises. I think it'll just sort of be, look, this is how we play. We concentrate on how we play. We know what their dangers are and their threats are, and we need to nullify that. And the other one will be doing the same, and they'll just sort of let the game play out, and then seeing how it goes, and then obviously adjust, accordingly as the game goes on.
Yeah, Scott, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think it's not like they've been managers who have been constantly coming up against each other as managers in the recent. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that kind of rivalry, maybe you do. Had it been Carrick against Robbins again, almost, that might have been a bit more interesting, because as we've said, it's definitely felt like Mark Robbins has had Michael Carrick's number. Maybe Carrick then would have felt compelled to do something different. From what Andy's saying, it sounds like neither manager are rabbit out the hat kind of managers, are they? Carrick certainly isn't. I mean, the thought of Carrick suddenly changing formation, doing something radically different for a game like this, it's just not in his kind of managerial playbook at all. He was though very, very complimentary about Frank Lampard. As Andy says, vice versa. At his press conference yesterday, basically saying, so Carrick was a couple of years below Lampard in the kind of West Ham school of excellence. Interestingly, Carrick's first ever senior game was as a substitute in an Intertoto Cup second leg game in Finland for West Ham in 1999. And when he came on in the last minute of that game, he played with Lampard. They were the central midfield partnership. And he kind of said, from that point onwards. But what he did say was, even when he started training with Lampard's kind of professionalism, the way he trained, the way he conducted himself around West Ham and the training ground and everything, even at that point, shone out like a beacon. And he was someone that Carrick kind of immediately latched onto as there's someone there who I can learn off and kind of look to emulate and all that kind of side of it. So I think there's massive mutual respect. They clearly are still friends, you know what I mean? But will that have an effect on the game? I doubt it.
Before we wrap up, Scott, and get predictions for both the game at Coventry tomorrow and elsewhere, because other games from Borough's perspective are hugely important. We touched on this in the vid and pod earlier this week, Scott, but for all the criticism, understandable at Boro over the last couple of weeks and months, tomorrow is a chance, isn't it, for Boro to say we can handle it, regardless of what happens elsewhere.
I think we said, didn't we? I think we said in the video earlier this week that for all we've kind of, had a pop at various things around the club in the last month or so, and it's clearly not been good enough. They've tossed away a pretty deep, a pretty good position to get to a scenario now where they could win and it still might not be enough. But if they do their side of the job, if they go to Coventry and win the game, then just by dint of how good Coventry are and the fact that they've got so much to play for, then I think you've got to hold your hands up and say, well, at least that Boro side have answered a lot of the questions that we've been asking of them in the last month. Have they got the bottle? Can they cope with difficult situations? Can Carrick manage a game well enough to turn things around if it's not going for them? If they go and win this game, then I think you've got to say, regardless of what else happens elsewhere, fair play to them. They've answered that question because as Andy was saying, it's going to be a hell of an atmosphere there. We'll have the enemy belting out before kick-off, won't we? And all of that. I always enjoy a little Coventry trip. So there'll be all of that, full house, expectation with Coventry. Have Boro got the bottle to deal with that? That's the question we've been asking of them all the last month, but we'll find out tomorrow, won't we?
Before we get to Coventry predictions, then, what's going to happen elsewhere? Bristol City, Preston, Sheffield United, Blackburn, Burnley, Millwall. What'll happen there?
Go on, you go first.
I can't see Millwall getting much at Burnley. I mean, Burnley are going for the title, aren't they? And I think that they've only conceded 6 goals in this calendar year, and I don't think anybody's all season has scored more than 1 against them. So I think they'll struggle there, Millwall. The one team that I do think have got a chance, and that's Blackburn Rovers, because I think they go to Sheffield United, don't they? And Sheffield United, I mean, they're pipe and slippers time, aren't they? It's like, Wilder rested players, not least Gus Hamer, against Stoke last time out. And I know there's not the urgency to necessarily rest him, because they rested him because he was on 2 yellows away from being banned from the playoffs. So he's got that luxury, really. But I mean, they'll want to win at home, won't they? They want to win at Bramall Lane, go out, finish their regular season on a high. But I think, Blackburn could sneak a result there, because I just think that there might be a bit of complacency in the Blades camp, because they know that they're a home and dry. And Bristol City, I mean, I think they're probably, it doesn't really matter. I think they probably get a result at is it at Preston, that one?
It's at Bristol.
Oh, it's at Bristol, yeah. So, I think they probably will beat Preston.
Yeah.
And the game at Coventry?
Well, it's unlike me. I'm not usually very optimistic about these things, but so perhaps that's a bad sign. But I think just the occasion, the home form, the atmosphere, I just think Coventry will edge it, possibly 2-1 maybe.
Scott?
I think Bristol City win. I think they finish 5th. I think, as we've been saying all the last month, I think yet again everything will fall for Boro. I think that Burnley win, and I think that Sheffield United win. So I think it's set up that if Boro can do it, they'll finish in the top 6.
Why do I sense? Why do I sense there's a book coming?
To be fair, let's caveat it with this. We've been saying on these videos for most of the last month and a half, Boro win, Boro will do it. But Coventry 3, Middlesbrough 1. That's what I think.
You love a 3-1. That's just the wrong way around. I think
Coventry win the game. Prove me wrong, Boro. That's what I'm saying. If anyone's watching this, prove me wrong, because no offense to Andy, but I'd love to see them prove me wrong. I think Coventry win the game.
Well, there's the headline for the video on pod. Right at the very end there. Prove us wrong, Boro. Well, thanks very much, Scott and Andy. And I hope you two will be sharing a glass of red like Frank and Michael after the game.
We'll be sharing a cup there.
Yeah. Too much work to do. We'll be working till midnight.
Too many, right? Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks, lads. Really appreciate that. Thanks, as ever, for watching and listening. If you're watching on YouTube, then as ever, as we always say, just tap the subscribe button below if you haven't already. If you're listening on your podcast platforms, then rate and review. We'll be back next week. Will it be for a debrief of the season, or will it be previewing the playoff semi-final first leg on Thursday night at the Riverside? Let's see. Thanks again. Safe travels if you're heading down the game. Enjoy the game, hopefully, and we'll see you next week.